Welcome to the Long View from Saskatchewan. My name is Alan Friesen. A lot of people have been talking this week about Pierre Poilievre's recent visit to Alberta and specifically about his speech to Albertans. And so I thought I would take my time this week to kind of dissect his speech from the point of view of a Sasky here, just living across the border from those in Alberta. But before I do, I want to start by mentioning that I really like Pierre Poilievre. I find him to be genuine and really truly caring for the people that he interacts with. And I think too that he comes from good Western stock. He often mentions the fact that he was raised in Alberta, and when he comes to Saskatchewan, he mentions the fact that his father's family came originally from the Leoville area here in Saskatchewan. My uncle who lived in that area said that his grandpa used to haul transport cattle for them back in the late 1950s. So you combine this Saskatchewan and Alberta background, and you kind of understand why he's been a champion for freedom and equality and all of that. So that aside, getting to his speech then, Mr. Poilievre attempted to pull on the heartstrings of Albertans by appealing to the pride that they might have in the country of Canada. And he did it kind of with an historical overview of talking about the things that happened in the past in Alberta and how all of that was tied to the love for the country of Canada. He brought up the example of homesteaders who started their farms and they did it for Canada. And he talked about the young men in 1914 who went off to fight in World War I from Alberta, and they going to Europe to fight for Canada, he mentioned. And in fact, he goes so far back as the fur traders who he mentions came up the rivers of the prairies and set up their forts and which would later become cities. And he mentioned that they never gave up, and implying that we shouldn't give up on Canada either. In fact, I should show you part of that clip where he talks about that right now.
Making Canada was hard. Before we risk it, let us remember the Albertans who sacrificed to provide this inheritance. The people who, through hardship and heroism, never gave up on Canada. The brilliant engineers and roughnecks who extracted the miracle molecules out of muddy bitumen to power our lives. They never gave up, so we should never give up. The traders who followed the winding rivers across the unmapped prairies to build the lonely forts which would become our future cities. They never gave up, and neither should we.
It all sounds great in theory, but the truth is that the fur traders didn't consider this land that they were struggling in as being part of Canada. In fact, they thought of Canada as that country that was 2,000 miles to the east. I can give you an example. William Trail was one of the great fur traders of the mid to late 1800s, working for the Hudson Bay Company. And when he was stationed at Fort Carlton and Prince Albert, he sent a letter to his mother, and he describes in that why he was put into that position and where his boss was headed off to for his holidays in winter. And I'll read to you what William Trail wrote to his mother. He wrote, "Mr. Clark was previously in charge, left in the early part of the fall, intending to go to Canada and Ireland." So do you get that? Mr. Clark left what is now Saskatchewan to go on holiday to Canada and to Ireland. Now, yes, it's true that the fur traders didn't give up, but they didn't give up because they had families to provide for and because they were working for the Hudson Bay Company that really didn't give them much of an option ever to give up. In the same way, the homesteaders did what they did for their families and for future generations of their families. They weren't doing what they were doing for Canada. In the same way that the young men who went out to war in 1914 to Europe from Alberta weren't doing so to fight for Canada. They were going to fight for the British Empire. The other side of this independence debate could very well say, yes, the homesteaders never gave up, and the young men going to war from Alberta never gave up, and the fur traders never gave up. So we will never give up until we get our independence from Ottawa. So you see, it works both ways and not very strongly. But where Mr. Poilievre really lost me was when he started to talk about Alberta being brought into Confederation in 1905 and the whole role of the British North American Act in that Confederation at the time. So I want to play a little bit of a clip for you at this time as well.
Win-win of Confederation was really crystallized in the British North American Act, often called the BNA. The BNA is Canada's DNA. It's a different kind of constitution than most countries. There are no lofty ideals expressed, no grand statements. It's an org chart. It's a who does what manual. It's a summary of what the provinces and the federal government should separately do as part of the common project of Canada.
Except that the BNA was not in the DNA of Alberta and Saskatchewan. You see, when Alberta and Saskatchewan were made provinces by the federal government, sort of unilaterally back in 1905, they were not given the right to the natural resources, which was part of the British North American Act. So it could very well be that the BNA was in the DNA of Canada, but it was not meant to be in the DNA of Alberta and Saskatchewan, and our two provinces had to fight for decades to get the same rights that all of the other provinces enjoyed from the very beginning. See, being a colony was not the same as being part of the British North American Act and Confederation. But let's get down finally to the nitty-gritty of who Mr. Poilievre really represents here in this whole debate, because notwithstanding the fact that he addresses his audience as his fellow Albertans, I have been not convinced for quite a while that Mr. Poilievre is actually in his heart an Albertan. And I'm not saying that it's his fault. Like, I know how it is, because even in my own personal life, at one point I left Saskatchewan for 5 years to go live in the country of Paraguay, and those 5 years had a profound impact on my life, even though they were just 5 years. Now, consider growing up in Alberta and then leaving as a young adult, leaving the colonies, let's say, to go to the center of power in Ottawa, and then for the next over 20 years representing a Laurentian riding in Parliament, and for 10 of those years being at the very center of power within the empire. Just imagine how that would change a person, how it would change how they thought and how they felt, or how they understood the world, because after all of that time, you have no choice but to start to think like the people around you. So Mr. Poilievre might very well believe that he is an Albertan at heart, yet all of this time has changed him. How else would you describe his response at the beginning of the speech when he gets his applause from the audience, the response that he gives at that time? I'll just show you a very short clip.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. That would be a response that you would give to an audience in the center of the empire, that is, in Ottawa. Not so much a response that you would usually give, I don't think, to fellow Albertans. You know, the British used to have a phrase that they would use for people who were born in the colonies and then as adults moved to the center of power, that was, London, England, they would call that, the phrase they would use was going home with the capital H. And I think that phrase really describes Mr. Poilievre so well. He's someone who was born in the colonies and raised there, but then in his adulthood, he went home with the capital H. He went to the center of power. He went to Ottawa, to the Laurentians, and that move changed him. After that, everything he did and saw, he looked through the lens of the empire, which is why even when he has a historical overview, the meaning has to always be found in the center of power and not in the colonies where he came from. So thanks for spending time with me this afternoon. We'll talk to you again next week, but until then, stay Saskatchewan and stay free.